Gothic by Piranha Bytes is an absolute classic RPG that was released in 2001 and that has always had a loyal fanbase. In it, you play as a nameless guy who gets thrown into a penal colony in a medieval fantasy setting, and you have to find your way around and survive. At the time, the setting and story were fairly unique, and the world as it was realized was super impressive. Now, I love this game, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to most people because, let's be honest, playing it nowadays can be a real pain in the ass. The controls are clunky, combat is both clunky, frustrating and kinda random at times. Some of the quests are a little too obtuse, there is a ton of trial and error, glitches galore, and a lot more that I'm not gonna discuss here. Nor am I gonna talk about the many positives. What I'm gonna talk about are 3 specific things about Gothic that I loved back then and that have stuck with me over the years. 3 things that Gothic does that I rarely see in other RPGs. So here it goes. Number 1. How much of a chump you are at the beginning and how much you grow in strength over the course of the game. Right at the start, the main character is greeted with a punch in the face.
Welcome to the colony.
Now that sets the tone. This world is hostile, nobody trusts or likes you, except Mud, and everything and everyone can basically kill you just by looking at you funny. At the old camp, one of the game's 3 factions, a clear hierarchy exists. There are the guards, the shadows, and at the very bottom are the diggers. They're weak, they need protection, and all they can do is mine for ore. And guess what? Even they will kick your ass if you decide to attack them. People in this world will push you around constantly.
We're to send you regards from Gwyn.
In the beginning, you won't stand a chance against any NPC, except Mud. Most of the monsters that roam the colony will murder you if you get too close to them. The thing is, strength needs to be earned. It needs to be worked for. This is a mentality you barely get to see in modern games. The only creatures you stand a chance against are meat bugs, scavenger bird things, and chunky and slow mole rats. But it's not like in most other RPGs, where you are in the starting area and get to do a couple of quests that level you up, and then it's on to the next area. No, the early game quests you get always have you move through terrain that is absolutely dangerous to traverse, and enemies that are stronger than you can be found wherever you look. Only with time will you be able to fight back against people who were bullying you early on in the game, after you trained and worked on yourself, basically like in every 80s movie. And man is it satisfying when you reach that point when orcs, who were these intimidating, unstoppable foes early on, become about as threatening as chihuahuas, and you can suddenly fight multiple ones at the same time. Actually, little side note while we're talking about this, when you decide to attack a human NPC, or they decide to attack you to teach you a lesson, they will rarely kill you. Instead, they will knock you out and steal some of your money and maybe your weapon. And you can do the same thing if you manage to beat them. This is actually another thing that I love about this game. Defeating human enemies doesn't automatically kill them. Instead, they're incapacitated, and you can choose to just take their weapons, reducing the probability of them attacking you again. Or, if you're in a murderous mood, you can finish them off. I don't quite understand why there aren't more games that do that. So, if you want to survive in this ridiculously hazardous world, you will want to level up and get stronger. Which leads me to point 2. The way that leveling and improving skills and character attributes is incorporated into the world itself. In many ways, it's fairly standard. You gain experience points by defeating enemies and completing quests. You just have to be sure to pick your battles carefully. Once you have enough experience points to gain a level, you receive a bunch of skill points, which you can spend on character attributes and skills. However, there is no skill tree, and you can't just open the character menu and allot the points. Instead, both skills and attribute improvements have to be acquired from certain NPCs in the world in exchange for the skill points you receive on level up. And this is something so simple that somehow makes the entire affair much more rewarding and believable. Instead of magically assigning a strength point, you actually have to find someone to train you. Granted, in the end it just boils down to a dialogue choice, with the character saying, "You've gotten stronger." But it still feels more grounded to have an actual trainer helping you fulfill your potential. When it comes to weapon skills, you are basically a blank slate at the beginning. Early on, the game actually makes a point that the protagonist doesn't even know how to hold a sword properly.
Beginners often tend to hold one-handed weapons with both hands. Now, don't even start getting into that habit. It'll do you no good. Hold the weapon with one hand,
Only after training with experts does he start improving, and this is also represented in the animation itself. And I gotta say, this is quite brilliant. Seeing your character going from awkwardly flailing a sword to elegantly swinging it is insanely gratifying, and shows how well character progression can be represented by a shift in the protagonist's behavior. But now, on to point 3. And probably the thing I love the most about Gothic, and what more RPGs should definitely try to attempt as well. What sets Gothic apart from so many other RPGs, and pretty much every modern RPG, is how well your character level and the levels of NPCs and monsters are integrated into the world. The way your character level is handled here, in relation to every monster and NPC, makes sense. You won't be fighting weak mole rats in the beginning, and higher leveled mole rats later. Some enemies are similar but distinct creatures, like orc hounds are stronger variants of wolves, or you'll be fighting biters instead of scavengers later on. It's not like in The Witcher 3, where you fight a Necker level 6, and later you fight a Necker level 18. And for NPCs, they all have different levels that feel organic, and you can assume that every character with some sort of weapon training is going to be stronger than you in the beginning, and will tear you a new one if you try to mess with them. For example, going back to the old camp's hierarchy, the guards are quite high up, and to get accepted as one of their own, you need to reach a certain level first. And if you were to fight these guys by that time, you can tell they are the same level as you, or stronger. Compare that mentality to, again, The Witcher 3. Geralt of Rivia is the biggest unbeatable badass in the land. But at the beginning of the game, he's the biggest unbeatable badass in the land, level 1. Technically, there shouldn't be a single human enemy who has a chance against him. Technically, no common bandit should pose a threat to him. If you end up at the wrong part of the map, however, Geralt of Rivia, biggest unbeatable badass in the land level 1, will fight common bandit level 40 and get his ass kicked. Character levels rarely make sense, sadly. Here are some more examples. Final Fantasy XII. Wise Van, a street urchin, capable of fighting and killing groups of trained soldiers early on in the game, but may have troubles fighting a bat later on. These bats are actually stronger than the soldiers you fought in the beginning. So technically, one of these winged little bastards could wipe out an entire group of armored trained fighters simply because its level is much higher. Skyrim, you start off as a blank slate of a person, no skills or anything, but somehow you're still immediately capable of disposing groups of trained soldiers that stand in your way. This list could go on, but let me stress, this is not necessarily a bad thing. Especially in games like The Witcher, leveling is more like an incentive and a reward to doing quests and exploring, while simultaneously making you feel powerful, which is good. However, it's frustrating to me that this has become the norm, and there are almost zero games from recent years where the level of your character actually makes sense in the world of the game itself. Some might argue that Dark Souls or Elden Ring have a similar start weak at strong mentality, and I do agree to a certain extent, because in the grand scheme of things, you have an enormous character progression going on in these games. But even Dark Souls, one of the first things you do is kill a giant monster. So it's not quite the same, even though the extremely hostile environment is most certainly there. It's just not quite what I mean. One can make a point that Baldur's Gate 3 kinda does it, but even there, level 1 characters are already superhuman in certain ways. Also, not all the character levels make sense. Gale, for example, should have a level that is way higher than it is, when you take his backstory into consideration. But I have to say, the level of the monsters and enemies mostly makes sense, except for maybe some of the bosses, whose levels should frankly be higher. Actually, while we're talking about Baldur's Gate, let's get to something a little different. Something I also appreciate about Gothic, in regards to quests. Going back to Baldur's Gate 1, or even Dark Alliance, there's one type of quest that has faced a lot of backlash. It's a classic trope that predates these two, but you know how it goes. You enter a tavern, talk to the barmaid, and she says she has a problem, as giant rats have infested her basement, and asks you to get rid of them. This scenario is basically the quintessential early game quest, where the protagonist gains experience by defeating lesser, fairly unthreatening creatures that most people, understandably, still wouldn't want to deal with. This has been memed to death, and criticized by RPG communities for decades. I feel many people dislike RPGs that start off with a hero doing menial tasks, and want quests that matter right away. And it's a fair perspective to have, especially in games where you play as some superhuman being. Why would you have to deal with this kind of trivial nonsense when you have much larger fish to fry? However, I think there is a place for slow starts and menial tasks. For one, they help establish the world, showing it before the plot kicks in, like when everything's at peace. They also ease you into the setting, letting your character learn to fight, and eventually you get to the point where the stakes get raised. Gothic also has menial tasks and errands, The big difference though is, just like with the leveling and the levels of NPCs and monsters, they make sense in this world. They are necessary stepping stones, because you are no legendary hero, or even a skilled fighter. You're a nobody, thrown into a world that doesn't care about you, and where you need to prove yourself, work your way up, and survive. In order to get accepted in any of the factions, you need to have a reputation, and to get that, you need to do favors for people, which can be mere errands.
If you want to join the camp, you'll have to earn some brownie points.
But here's where Gothic handles even the menial crap really well. A simple errand might send you through extremely dangerous terrain, turning what seems trivial on paper into a fight for your life. And I think this is how succeeding at something rather meaningless can feel like an enormous accomplishment. Now I'd like to talk a little about a certain mechanic that's been present in open world RPGs over the past 2 decades that completely clashes with logical enemy levels. Level scaling. Meaning, depending what your character level is, the enemies will always have a similar level to keep things interesting and allow the player to visit the entire map from the get-go, and allow them to form their own personal adventure that may not be the same one experienced by others. Oblivion did that in 2006, and I have to say, I'm not a fan. I understand the sentiment, but the way it was handled made character progression feel meaningless, as random bandits would eventually start carrying otherworldly armor. Skyrim did a far better job at the level scaling thing, as the level increases only in areas that you haven't visited yet, so things get progressively harder. But if you were to revisit old areas, you'd be fighting weaker enemies again, which avoids the whole run-of-the-mill bandit and epic armor paradox. However, there's the aforementioned inconsistency of being able to fight trained soldiers while you at that point should still be an untrained slob. Or even dragons can be low level, which just feels weird to me. But to its benefit, the game actually has some monsters, like the giants and the dragon priests, that are always there and that you should avoid until much later in the game. But again, let me stress that this whole level scaling thing is a valid approach because it does allow for unique adventures, where you can complete quests and areas in any order you want, while also having a sense of progression. Unless it's Final Fantasy VIII, where the more you level, the harder the game gets the further you progress, which makes leveling almost seem like a punishment. So, level scaling is not inherently bad, it just makes logical level integration impossible. Side note, I preferred when Cyberpunk didn't have level scaling. But there are actually 2 games that come to mind that do kinda share the Gothic spirit as well. And for one, there is Kingdom Come Deliverance. In it, you are the nobody son of a blacksmith who can barely fight, but has had some sword fighting lessons. You do menial tasks, then the stakes get raised, and you have to survive in a world that is dangerous because every soldier you encounter has had more training than you. Not everything has been handled the way I would have preferred either. Like, your character strength is very dependent on gear, and you can find high-level gear early on, which makes you pretty much unbeatable for a huge chunk of the game, and you will find bandits with extremely fancy equipment, which is weird, but in general, this is a direction that I'd like more devs to go in. The other game I only recently discovered is Drova, Forsaken Kin. Wow. From what I've played so far, this is basically Gothic in 2D, just with better controls and combat. It was developed by a very small team, and on their homepage they explicitly state that Gothic was an inspiration. You start off as a nobody, only stand a chance against rat things, need to go to trainers to learn how to fight and improve your attributes, and trying to mess with any NPC will result in your ass getting kicked and messed with NPC looting your unconscious body. This game looks pretty much exactly like what I wanted, and I would definitely recommend it if you like Gothic, or if the whole Gothic mentality is intriguing to you. And I suppose this is basically the point of this video. I'm asking creators of RPGs to create more games like this again. Making levels of NPCs and monsters make sense in their world almost seems like an art form when I look at how it's being handled in most RPGs. So I want more of that. And there is a place for games where the protagonist starts off weak and can't do flashy sword moves, can't fight multiple opponents at once, can't immediately be the hero, but instead has to work for it, has to work hard to gain strength and become the hero that we want to be. Because I can hardly think of anything more satisfying in an RPG than all that training finally paying off and you finally get to stand up for yourself and punch back at those who were walking all over you in the beginning. With all those games out there that are power fantasies, where you play as demigods that easily decimate everything in their paths, this more grounded approach to finding strength and overcoming adversity definitely deserves more love. Well, what do you think? Are my favorite things about Gothic something you would love to see in more games as well? Or do you prefer being a demigod that just annihilates everything? Do you care about levels of NPCs and monsters making sense in the world of a video game? And do you know of any other current day RPGs that follow that same philosophy? Please, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you liked it, leave a like, and maybe if you want to help me out, please subscribe to my channel. That's all from me. I hope you have a lovely day.